Let me move to the third question. As a material developer of CLIL, what are your principles of developing materials? I think that you have already talked about this question.
Well, yeah, I've talked about it. There are some other things. I've used this phrase with you. What I'm interested in is the relationship between the text. It could be a written text or a spoken text, or even a visual text. The relationship between the text and the task. So I think that I always want the task to be the first thing. I want the students to see what they have to do, even before they look at the text, or even listen to the text, if it's a spoken text. Possibly not with the visual. Maybe the visual would stimulate the text, but I try to get away from the traditional idea, Chiharu, of when you read the famous thing, read the text and answer the questions that follow.
This is a way that we teach.
Yes, it is. It's not just in Japan, it's in many countries. No. And I think that it's problematic. It's problematic in L1, and I think it's much worse if you're doing in L2, exactly, or L3, whatever.
I'm very interested in these issues. Yes.
Well, because you say, basically you're saying to the student, read this text for absolutely no reason, and then the reasons are later. And then
there was no reasons to.
Yeah.
So
it's a strange thing to do. But if you say do this by reading the text, it's an immediate difference. So fill in the mind map by reading the text, and you're filling in the mind map in order to do something else again. It seems to me much more logical. It makes more sense to the student. And so I think that's one thing I'm very careful with.
Okay, could you say that again? So you said that to read this and answer the question is kind of problematic.
Yeah, I think
so, and more natural way is what?
Is to say, do this, for example. Complete the mind map.
Yes.
By reading the text. So the text becomes secondary. The task is primary. Whereas if you say, read the text and answer the question to follow, it's all the text that's primary. That's why students get so frightened of text. They hate texts, because they know,
they don't want to read the text.
Of course they don't want to read it, because they know that when they've read it, even if they enjoy it, they've got to answer these damn questions. So if you say, look, here's what you're going to do. You're going to talk to your partner. Well, mind map first. You are going to talk to your partner. You're going to tell your partner about half of this text. Okay. So read the text and then tell your partner about it. Then you read the text. You're conditioned. Your reading is conditioned by the fact that you know you're going to have to report it to the other guy. That's not the case in normal education. You just read the text because the teacher told you to read the text. So, particularly in second language and third language, when the student says, "Okay, I've got to do that," then it helps me to read the text. Text is not easy, so it helps me. So that's one thing I'm very big on: text-task relationship.
Yes. So you think that task first and the text second.
That's basically what I think. Yeah, that's basically what I think. I mean, not always, but as much as possible. Yeah, as much as possible. The other thing I'm interested in is the clarity of instructions, because in textbooks you've got to be careful with writing instructions. You have to write instructions for the students. You're having a direct dialogue with the student. You're not talking to the teacher. So if you write too much language in the instruction, research has shown that it's often not the activity that's the problem. It's the students misunderstand the instruction. And this becomes much more important in second or third language processing. What research has found very clearly that students in exams particularly, it's not the conceptual material that's the problem, it's often the what am I supposed to do? They just get it wrong all the time. So I'm very careful about instructions. I keep them as short as possible. As short as possible. I don't want to talk too much to the student in the textbook. Short as possible. If I think they're too short, in the teacher's guide I'll tell the teacher, I'll say, be careful with the instruction because it's quite difficult. Just let them read it themselves. Basically, if the student doesn't understand what to do, there's some problem with the textbook.
You mean that it is not textbook's fault, but it is not because of the students' lack of...
Absolutely, it's not the students' lack of ability.
Absolutely. It is because of the textbook's instruction.
Well, they looked at mathematics result in California. It was in Berkeley. It was a research project in the late 90s, and they into mathematics failure, underachievement in mathematics, and they found out.
They found out that it was instruction.
Absolutely, it was 60% of the failure was because students didn't know what to do. They couldn't understand what they were supposed to do. It was the functional language, not the mathematical language. It wasn't even the mathematical concepts. They weren't failing because of mathematics. They were failing because they were doing things wrong. Extraordinary. So that comes back to task design, of course. And so, you know, in L1 it's important. This was L1 research. Then it must be even more important.
In second round.
Exactly. When you come to it. So that's another thing. I'm very careful about instructions and clarity. And the third principle is, I think, involvement. I want the activity or task or whatever you call it. I want it to, you know, involve the students as much as possible. I want to I want the teacher to be irrelevant as much as possible. The teacher has to intervene, obviously, but
teacher has to what?
Intervene.
Intervene.
It has to be intervention from the teacher, obviously. There always has to be. But sometimes I think the less intervention, the better. If the students are working on their own and are happy with what they're doing, the teacher will be very happy.
But this intervention, maybe that you go in, you shouldn't involve students learning too much. I mean that. How can I?
Yeah, if the materials themselves can get the students going, can get them intervening and working, then the materials are obviously successful. The interesting thing, Chiharu, is that there's always a three-way dynamic between the student, the teacher, and the materials. There's always a three-way dynamic. You can't ignore it. You know, there are usually materials in a classroom, and so you can't subtract it from the equation. So what I try and do is I try to make sure that the three-way dynamic is always working. What I try and do is I try to turn down the teacher intervention. I try to turn the teacher down, and I try to turn the materials and the students up.